Hi, everyone. I promised to do a video today to go over the assignment a bit more, our overall group work and our class goal. And I thought in this video, I'd also give a timeline and any clarity on the group work. We ran out of time today and also last week. So I wanted to give a little more attention to the assignment and where we're going overall. So first, the assignment, interception points for social inclusion and agricultural innovation systems. The objective of the assignment is to critically analyze existing agricultural innovation system conceptual frameworks or some variation of an innovation system framework and identify points where social inclusion can be promoted. So students will build upon their conceptual framework and consider theories of systems disruption, such as niche regime theory, and draw on additional theoretical frameworks and concepts around social differentiation, such as decolonization, decentralization, feminism, etc. And I'll go over a few of those examples in this video, but you're also welcome to apply other theories, frameworks, your own thoughts on it as well. So the instructions just briefly is to familiarize yourself with existing AIS conceptual frameworks. And there are so many out there. I'm going to highlight a few in this presentation, but you might already be working with one within your organization or within your research. I encourage you to work with something you're familiar with or something that really interests you. And then you want to identify key components within the conceptual framework where there might be areas to be more socially inclusive or consider social differentiation. And you can consider different theories of your choice in order to apply this social differentiation lens. And I'll go through that, as I mentioned. Then you want to draw out this conceptual framework and visually depict the key components of where in the AIS conceptual framework there's places for social inclusion. And you might already have your AIS framework drawn out, or you might find it on the internet or in a favorite paper of yours, and then you can overlay that with areas or points of leverage where you've identified there can be more thinking systematically on social inclusion within the conceptual AIS framework. And then in the paper, which is quite short, you want to provide a critical analysis of the strengths and weaknesses of your conceptual framework, what's being left out, what is really emphasized in the AIS framework, and what it would mean from a systems point of view or other critical lens to consider social inclusion within your conceptual framework. So just some examples on agricultural innovation systems conceptual frameworks. I've gotten a few questions. They really come in all shapes and sizes. We've generally been introduced to the concept of agriculture innovation systems. Generally, there's a challenge presented, there's research engaged, there's education systems in order to teach people about the research that comes about, and then there's information dissemination, and then ultimately you hope that users adopt your innovation, and the circle. It's an iterative process that's supported in an enabling environment through agriculture policies, innovation policies, and investment, et cetera. So this is a representation from an article on sustainability of an agriculture innovation system that is really quite broad in nature. It sort of looks like what a food systems map might look like. It's really trying to bring in sort of this whole picture. Another example is looking a little bit more closely at maybe small scale innovation systems where you have the classic agriculture research system, which might be universities, et cetera. and then the agricultural education system, and the agricultural advisory services system, which might be extension, et cetera, with farmers in the middle. This might be a map that is more easy to overlay social differentiation on, because you can really think through what goes into agriculture research systems. How might you think through social differentiation and how people's different social experiences might impact the agriculture research system and vice versa. So this is zeroing in a little bit more than this more broad take. And this is from Communication for Agricultural Innovation in Bolivia, the Challenge of Institutionalization. And then here's a very broad variation of an agriculture innovation system. This isn't broken out to a conceptual framework necessarily just yet, but this is something that you could be intrigued by and create your own conceptual framework from. So we know that there needs to, in an innovation system, there needs to be knowledge creation, knowledge transfer, and knowledge application. And what goes into each of these, absolutely, as we've talked about in class, it will matter who's at the table. So it's really clear sort of how we could incorporate more systematically social differentiation. And this is from the Australian Innovation Science and Research System. This is a agriculture innovation system conceptual framework that Jessica showed us. And this is the product life cycle approach. So you have on your left-hand side, market research and testing, and on your right-hand side, introduction and delivery pathways, public or private. So you can see some of the same themes reemerging over and over again. And here we're starting at stage 1, product profile, moving all the way through discovery, validation, et cetera, into the adoption plateau, which is maturity. And so you could take this agriculture innovation system conceptual framework as a starting point, and then from there think through, okay, in the product profile, stage 1, how are we thinking about different types of users in a way that some users might be overlooked, or we want to be more inclusive, or make sure that we don't do damage to certain groups of people. How can we include social differentiation here a bit more? And I guess to be clear about the leverage points, which I've mentioned, I think, several times. When I say leverage points, it's really places within your agriculture innovation system conceptual framework where you think there might be areas to leverage more systematic thinking about social differentiation. And ultimately, you're trying to incorporate this type of thinking so you can have better social outcomes. And that really goes to this niche regime theory that Case introduced today. So if all of these other agriculture innovation system conceptual frameworks are driving at an innovation that's going to change the system, and we want to have positive social outcomes, which is a big reason why we want to consider social differentiation and the effects of different social experiences. You can also think about these larger systems changes. So if you have an innovation that's coming in at this bottom level, the niche in innovation, and trying to move its way up and affect the socio-technical regime, and then even further, eventually affecting the socio-technical landscape, which is often much more out of our control, but applying pressure from the top, per se, on the regime, and ultimately what the niche innovations are trying to affect. So when you're thinking about your agricultural innovation system conceptual framework and the innovations that are generated through them, you also could consider or start with the system itself and where you think there needs to be more social differentiation included. You could think of it just from the niche innovation perspective, where we're developing all these innovations to affect the socio-technical regime. Or you could think on it as a multi-level perspective, which is a body of literature very relevant and talked about in this space. In fact, this might even be a conceptual framework trying to explain multi-level perspectives. And so you could look at it from this three-tiered perspective in how we consider social differentiation on these three levels. So you have a lot to play with in terms of what you're choosing for your agricultural innovation system conceptual framework and where you want to place the innovation system that you're thinking about in terms of the system it's trying to change. So if you have your AIS conceptual framework generating an innovation, what is that innovation trying to change and how is it going to change? If you're thinking from a systems perspective, this model here is a good way to go about it. So I keep talking about social differentiation and laying that out on top of your AIS conceptual framework. And I just want to highlight some of the theories that you can consider social differentiation and how it might be applied to your agriculture innovation system conceptual framework. So one theory is feminization of poverty. This is the idea that women are more likely to experience poverty than men due to systemic inequalities in the economy, but also other places, as we'll see in feminist theory, such as lower wages, less access to education and job opportunities, and unpaid care worker responsibilities. So this might be the type of system that we want to affect. But when we think about the niche innovations that we're creating, we need to consider whether or not you need higher capital, you need access to education or social networks. This all can be explained and the lack of access women have to these things, and therefore the lack of access they're going to have to the benefit of an innovation through feminization of poverty. Same thing with feminist theory. We're dealing with social systems where men hold primary power and dominate in social, political, and economic realms. We have to think about gender roles, which are socially constructed and drive behavior, expectations, etc. And then intersectionality, recognizing that individuals may experience different forms of oppression and privilege based on the intersection of their social identities. So when we're thinking about social differentiation and making sure agriculture innovation systems consider it in order to have these positive social outcomes, is it just gender that we have to be sure that we're accounting for? Or is it a myriad of relevant diversity that each identity can in and of itself have a different experience, but then when they have intersectional profiles or experiences, that means something different as well. So how do you account for that within an innovation system framework? Or at this point, just where might that particular point be within the conceptual framework? You don't have to figure it all out in this one assignment. Another theory to consider is decolonization. As we've talked about, colonialism creates unequal power relations between colonizers and colonized, resulting in the exploitation of land, resources, and people, and as well as the imposition of cultural, social, and political norms and values. So when we're thinking about agriculture innovation systems, donors and who's providing the money, they're often coming from colonizing nations, the global minority, and putting their opinions and priorities into the funding restrictions, et cetera, et cetera. So If you're considering donors within your innovation system, this is certainly a power dynamic that's at play and is explained by decolonization theory. Additionally, decolonization involves the recognition and redress of historical and ongoing injustices. And decolonization also involves the examination and critique of knowledge systems, which is something absolutely that we're dealing with, methodologies that have been produced and legitimatized through colonialism. So who is the expert and who's continuing the vocabulary and language that we use to explain challenges or explain economic justices, et cetera. There's more to decolonization, but this is just some examples for you to think about as you're trying to explain where social differentiation might matter in your AIS conceptual frameworks. One body of work that we haven't talked a lot about, but I think is really important, is human-centered design, which puts problem solving it's problem solving that puts the needs, wants, and perspectives of the end users at the center of the design process. Very relevant to innovation systems and, of course, user-centered and driven research. It involves understanding and empathizing with the user's context, needs, and goals, and using that information to inform design decisions. So it's very iterative, and it frequently is testing and getting feedback from users to ensure that it's meeting their needs. And it also recognizes that diversity and inclusivity are critical to effective design, and that designers must be mindful of the potential biases and assumptions that may influence their design decisions. One thing that is almost entirely absent from a lot of the agriculture innovation system conceptual frameworks I've seen is the perspective of those leading the innovation efforts themselves and how that influences the process and who needs to be at the table just to even begin an innovation process. Human-centered design begins to get at that a bit and also has a much deeper focus than most AIS conceptual frameworks on the user themselves. And of course, from our perspective, who that user is really driving a lot of that. And finally, just an example, there are many more theories you could apply here, is decentralization theory. Decentralization refers to the transition of power and authority from a central government or authority to a local or regional authority. So you could think about this from moving power centers of international development and agriculture research for development, quote unquote, from global minority populations to global majority populations, or global north to global south. Decentralization can take many forms, including political, administrative, and fiscal decentralization. So who's funding the research? Political decentralization involves the transfer of decision-making power to local governments or elected officials. And you could see how this decision-making power idea can be transferred to agriculture research for development as well. And then finally, decentralization theory emphasizes the importance of balancing central control and local autonomy, and of ensuring that decentralized systems are accountable, transparent, and inclusive. So again, those are just examples. You can use other types of theory, but it would be really nice if you can make sure to cite them and make sure that you are pointing them out clearly within your framework and paper. So this is just an example that I want to show you from scaling, which is sort of putting it all together in the layout of the assignment. And this is building a scaling conceptual framework with social differentiation considered. So this is the same exact thing, except for you'll be doing it with an agricultural innovation system conceptual framework. And this is from Gender Up. So first, the scaling conceptual framework. This is what we chose to use when we went forward to in our first paper, which I think you've all read, Anticipating Gender Impacts and Scaling Innovations for Agriculture, Insights from the Literature. This was our conceptual framework about how scaling worked. So as I've mentioned before, you've seen this slide quite a bit. There's an external environment that you want to change. So if you think about niche regime theory, this is the landscape level or socio-technical environment. And so you want to change it with your innovation. In order to make change within the external environment or break through into that socio-technical space, that mid-level in the niche regime model, you need to scale your innovation. And there's all kinds of scaling processes that occur in order for others to adopt your innovation. And then once there are users of your innovation, and with increased users, you're going to have an innovation impact. Here, as I describe in the paper, I've put stars where it's important to consider social differentiation within this conceptual framework. So this is a very basic map of where I'm going to be focusing my social differentiation within the scaling processes and within the innovations themselves, as you can see. And to do that, and to dive a little bit deeper, which you will do either in your paper now or as the group agrees on a certain framework and moves forward on this discussion, you can see here I pulled out the scaling process. So that circle that was in my conceptual framework, I'm now pulling out to highlight the typical scaling steps within a scaling strategy. And this is an example from the scaling readiness framework, which you all, I think, are also familiar with, and that's what Gender Up was reflecting on quite a bit when it was built. So we took this scaling map, drew it out. So for scaling strategies, they have characterize, which is profile stakeholders, interventions, innovations, and scaling contexts. All places to think very long and hard about social differentiation. And then diagnose, which is step 2 in the scaling process. Assess the scaling readiness of the innovation in its scaling context. Each innovation is going to be very different in its scaling readiness, depending on who you are within that community. And then strategize, identify activities and partnerships to overcome bottlenecks for scaling as part of the scaling strategy. So what are the strategies you're going to employ in order to bring people on and use your innovation? Again, another place where social differentiation is critical. But you see that social differentiation isn't represented in this scaling framework right now. So really, it was my job to take this framework and then think through where to lay over leverage points for considering scaling differentiation in order to have better social outcomes. So you've also seen this slide before, but this is a laid out version of the scaling readiness circular scaling conceptual framework. And so right here is the scaling process without any consideration of social differentiation. You have the challenge opportunity, you have the innovation team, the innovation, the context, you have the team discussion and strategy building, you have communication and media, complementary innovations, intermediaries and partnerships. Again, it's really just that circular scaling pathway drawn out linearly. And then here's where I start to overlay where you can think about social differentiation in each of these processes and the questions you need to ask yourself in order to think systematically about social differentiation in this scaling conceptual framework. So who defines these? The innovation team, the innovation, the context. Who is at the table when it comes to team discussions and strategy building? Who will this affect or not when it comes to communications and media, intermediaries and partnerships? Additionally, what unforeseen consequences could arise? And ultimately, who's going to benefit from this scaling goal? What are the differentiated benefits of the innovation throughout the community, et cetera? So this is really what you're going to do with this first assignment, is start with the Agriculture Innovation System Conceptual Framework, and then overlay where you can systematically include considerations around social differentiation for this ultimate social goal. And these questions, who defines these, who's at the table, who will this affect or not, what unforeseen consequences could arise? This is really derived from feminist theory, feminization of poverty, but also from a lot of empirical case studies. So we, as you most likely know, did an analysis of all the different examples of where scaling efforts had gone wrong. And Nina's example today is a perfect one of that, or Anne Reitveld's a couple webinars ago. We were able to work both from the conceptual framework and theory perspective, and then also draw lessons from empirical analyses as well. And then ultimately, just to give you some foresight of where we're going, we want to be able to take these conceptual frameworks that have considered social differentiation and then apply it, integrate it, I should say, with tools and methods in order to ensure researchers and scalers of innovation can be sure that they're innovating to include social differentiation for social outcomes. And I'll explain that a lot more when I introduce the next assignment. But this is a preview of how we sort of put all of this together into a new tool called Gender Up, where we have a linear sort of progression of scaling, and then it's integrated with social differentiation and tools and methods in order to make sure you're doing it right along the way. So ultimately it's a 5-stage process, which I've explained before, where you define the innovation and scaling ambition with your innovation team. And that team learns about consequences of not considering social differentiation. So you're sort of bringing people along the way. And then you think through exploring relevant diversity relative to the innovation. How do different social dimensions affect access to the benefits of the innovation? You explore implications of intersectionality, and then you adopt a scaling strategy, which draws a lot from different methods and tools that are already out there in order to make more inclusive scaling strategies, and then ultimately integration. So I've gone over agriculture innovation system conceptual frameworks. I've gone over the social theories you can draw upon, but I also encourage you to think through from your own empirical analysis or own example. Ultimately, what you want to deliver is a written report of 1,000 to 1,500 words that describes your chosen AIS conceptual framework and your critical analysis of its strengths and weaknesses, a visual representation of your conceptual framework that shows the key components of the IAS framework and the areas of interception for social inclusion, and a bibliography. And then ultimately, well, that's the deliverable for this assignment. The next assignment will be on operationalizing leverage points, available tools and methods, landscape analysis, which will really bring in the tools and methods that are already available in order to operationalize thinking through social differentiation within the agriculture innovation systems conceptual framework that you've laid out. So if you have more questions about the assignment, please let me know. I am available for questions. Now I want to just briefly go over our group work. Your groups have been assigned. The goal of this group work, which is really the goal of the class, is to create a conceptual framework for innovating for social transformation with potential methods. So that's bringing in this first assignment in quite a big way, and then overlaying it with methods and smoothing it out just to start the foundation of a comprehensive conceptual framework for innovating for social transformation. As I said, this lays the foundation for an actual tool that could help researchers think about innovating from the start for social goals. So what this will look like, March 14th, which is today, please meet with your group this week to choose an agriculture innovation system or other variation conceptual framework that you all will work on. So you all are doing individual thinking right now with the paper and developing your own conceptual framework in areas of social inclusion. But ultimately with your group, you're going to want to have one or maybe two that you put forward to the overall class. So please this week, just test out the tools in which you're going to use to meet, figure out your systems, and then ultimately, please identify the agriculture innovation system conceptual framework you're going to use and identify areas of social differentiation. You don't need to have this totally figured out, just some general thinking around it. And then March 21st, we're going to have a lot more time just for ourselves because our speakers won't be with us anymore. And each group will present to the class on your chosen AIS conceptual framework and where your team thinks there are possible areas to include social differentiation. So those presentations will be quite casual. I would expect to have about 5 to 10 minutes per presentation. Maybe we'll go for around 7 minutes. I'll send out further guidance on that. But I think 7 minutes is what we can plan for. There will be 5 groups in total. And then March 28th, there's not going to be any class. So meet with your group to finalize the leverage points to include social differentiation. So while all might be a little bit fuzzy when you present, you really want to zero in on this week of March 28th on where those areas of where you can really think through social differentiation within this AIS conceptual framework. And hopefully you'll get some good ideas from the other presenters, et cetera. And then you want to connect them with the tools and available methods. So again, this will be introduced further next week, but you're really going to want to start thinking through, okay, if these are the places where social differentiation considerations can occur within this AIS conceptual framework, how would someone actually do that? What's the method they would use or tool that's already available? You can also bring in some of your own ideas if what you need isn't available out there. And so April 4th, we'll present on that to the class. The group will present to class on tools and methods for social differentiation. So you don't need to present the whole package just yet. We just want to present on the tools and methods you're thinking about using, which will be informed from your landscape analysis assignment that each individual will have to do. You want to present the ones that are rising to the top for your group to the rest of the class. And this is really meant to be a sharing exercise, understanding what's already out there in order to apply them to our own, each group's conceptual framework. And just professionally, this is very helpful for us all to know what's available in our own research in terms of tools and methods for social differentiation. And then finally, and then for the rest of the class, we'll have a guided workshop. So you'll be able to continue to work in your group. And then finally, on April 11th, we will present again on the completed conceptual framework for innovating for social transformation with your methods, with potential methods. And all of your advisors and all of the speakers will be invited to this session. So we will send out an invite that you can send to your advisor, and they will be available to join, and they can see you present on your work. Throughout all of this, you're welcome to meet within your group whenever you need to. I've been clear that this week you need to meet in order to choose your group AIS conceptual framework. And I have not specified when and where to meet throughout the rest of this class agenda. I'll leave that to you, but you should know at this point exactly when you need to present as a group and what work you need to do as a group. And this is basically reflected on the syllabus, but if you have any questions, please reach out to me. So finally, last note on groups, they've been added to Canvas. If there are issues with your groups, or if you decide you have your own little group that wants to be work together, that's fine. Just let us know. Everyone should basically be in the same time zone in the groups we created. And please set up your group meetings ASAP. So that's it. Thank you so much. And be in touch with any questions.